Welcome to the Culture of Kindness podcast. Have you wondered about the direction the world is going? Wondered if you and the rest of the world are connecting in a healthy way?
More I can see it in others, and now I've changed the lens through which I see the world, and to be kind is the only possible result.
Because you don't have the language of talking, it's kind of almost a language of kindness.
In this podcast, we discuss everything from what makes a brilliant leader to where is the world going on our current trajectory? And how can we make a culture of kindness, and do we actually need to? Or are we doing all right just as we are?
It's roughly 2,000 years since some bloke got nailed to a tree for suggesting that we should all be a little bit nicer to each other. And I fear that over the last 2,000 years we haven't moved on very far from that.
Inherently, humans are very badly flawed. And there is...
I, Nahala Summers, became obsessed about the power of kindness after it was the kindness of a stranger that changed my life. So now I am lucky enough to talk to the most eclectic mix of people probably on any podcast. Come inside and subscribe. It will open your mind and world up to the best examples of living life wholeheartedly.
When you look on the Facebook, even when you look on the comments on BBC, everyone goes, "Oh, I hate bullies." But then that's like saying I hate Walter. You know, bullies have come from somewhere, and Walter's good.
A tap on my shoulder from somewhere that said, "You cannot just do an act of kindness in a day and that be good enough."
Before we go to the full episode, I just wanted to jump in and let you know that the Culture of Kindness leadership book is available right now on Amazon. It's getting brilliant reviews because it is a practical support for any leader or organisation looking to make a more successful workplace. And who doesn't love that? To find out more about what we offer, go to www.acultureofkindness.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening, folks, and supporting this podcast. And if you love it, please do share it with your networks. Welcome to A Culture of Kindness. It's a really great honour to have Sanjiv here once again talking about a very different topic, and we are doing a bonus for the in-between of season 1 and season 2 of A Culture of Kindness. Sanjiv, just to give an overview for those who haven't already heard your original podcast of who you are and what you do.
Yes. Hi, Nala. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity again. It's a real pleasure. My name is Sanjiv Nichani. I'm what's called a pediatric intensivist, which means my daytime and indeed nighttime job is to look after critically ill children on life support machines. Many children have pneumonias, have road traffic accidents, have heart surgery. So my job is to help them recover from these very serious assaults or insults or infections that have affected their body. I've been a consultant in the care of critically ill children, which is essentially what I do in Leicester for the last nearly 24 years now. And in addition, 12 years ago, because I'm a bit of a restless person, I started a charity called Healing Little Hearts, which sends volunteer teams of doctors and nurses now across the world to perform heart surgery on babies, children, and teenagers for free. And that's been going for the last 12 years, thanks to the largesse of the great British public who've got right behind us. And I'm very pleased to share with you, you know this already, but we've operated on over 2,000 children, working with 13 countries and 150 international charity missions.
I mean, Healing Little Hearts has a huge impact on just saving lives, saving thousands of children's lives. What impact has COVID-19 had on the work that you guys do within Healing Little Hearts?
Well, sadly, we are completely grounded as the whole world is literally in lockdown. So the collateral damage is quite substantial. 2020, we were able to fly out for 5 missions and operated on 80 children. But since the 13th of March, 13th of March was the last trip when the team was going to fly out, and we had to cancel that. And essentially, we're just waiting for the skies to open again and to start our trips and start operating. Now, having said that, we have to obviously, for the sake of our volunteers particularly, be very careful where we choose to go. And I'm getting the impression, because it seems from what little we know of COVID, that it doesn't seem to like the warmer weather, consistently warm weather as you get in the tropics. So possibly Africa would be my first port of call. The situation in India is still evolving. And I don't think it'll be safe to go there for another few months until we have a fuller picture. So, in fact, I have been negotiating and talking to my colleagues in Tanzania, Kenya, Namibia. We were supposed to be in Namibia this week and next week, and we've had to cancel both back-to-back trips. But it seems that they have escaped the worst of COVID, which is brilliant, because Africa normally faces most diseases and fares much worse with most diseases than the other parts of the world. So that's a bit of relief. So I think Namibia is likely to be our first port of call in maybe July, August time, or end of June.
I mean, you came and did a fantastic talk at the Big Talks Global, and without doubt, your talk caused waves of kind of gasps of, people just didn't understand the issues that there were out there with regards to health concerns. We take it for granted, don't we, the NHS and our ability to fix ourselves in so many different ways. It's interesting that people really don't have the level of understanding on the lack of healthcare out in other countries and the sorts of things that Healing Little Hearts does. It's right? I mean, you must have that kind of viewpoint, and lots of people are always a bit shocked by your story.
You're absolutely right. And as I always say, and I said that day as well, the best way to illustrate the scale of a problem is with the help of statistics. And as I've already mentioned, Healing Little Hearts has been going for 12 years. I have to do my best to raise funds to keep going, and therefore it means I do many, many talks. And every time I say that there are 1 million children dying from untreated heart disease each and every year in the 21st century, there are gasps in the audience. People are just completely gobsmacked, and utterly gobsmacked. And then when I add a bit of further context and say in the UK we have 6,000 children needing surgery and they survive with 98% success rates. And also the third bit of information that gets people wide-eyed is when I say, by the way, the number of children dying from untreated heart disease across the world, particularly in the poorest countries, is more than double the number of deaths from malaria across the world. And that's when the coin really drops and it really sinks in, and they think, wow. Because the reality, and you can understand why, everybody knows about Ebola and HIV and now COVID and previously cholera, etc. But what's happened in the last 30 or 40 years is that with economic development, even in Africa, the rate of infection has plummeted. Therefore, fortunately, deaths from infection have plummeted, which therefore means that deaths from untreated surgical problems, which is what a hole in the heart essentially is, that has now come to the fore and finally coming into the public conscience, although still just very, very faintly. So I need a huge amount of help to get this out there, to publicize it, get it out there in the public conscience, so we can start working with countries across the world to help them deal with these problems. Because there are this obscene number of children dying needlessly. And when I say needlessly, I mean because most of these problems, these heart problems that babies and children are born with, can be fixed. with relatively minor surgery. So I'm not talking about really complex surgery, which is not possible to do in the poorer countries. Actually, this is relatively minor surgery. So you're not throwing a huge amount of money at a problem. Actually, you're spending relatively small amounts of money to make a massive difference.
You often, every time I speak to you, I always hear you say humans are flawed. We have some terrible things about us that seem to come out, and you'll always highlight some of those to me. Do you believe that at this time through COVID-19, that we're really showing that in the human race, this kind of flawed side of ourselves? Do you think that's coming out more?
I will stand by my statement, and that's, of course, a very big discussion for a separate time, the human flawed, stating the obvious. In the context of COVID, I think we are flawed because, in context of COVID and healthcare generally, and particularly, as you already said, we don't appreciate how lucky we are. And what I mean by that is humans expect perfection. In the UK, the population, expect perfection from the health service. Now, perfection does not exist. And I think the sad thing is that to try to meet the public's expectations, the politicians embark on different paths to try to achieve perfection. So I think there's dishonesty on both sides. And what is really needed is an honest debate that actually, this is a general statement, I'll come to COVID in a minute, that actually the NHS cannot cater for everybody's needs ad infinitum. That people themselves have to take a significant amount of responsibility, and COVID is a classic example of that. And this has got to be genuinely successful, a joint effort. So the focus has to shift from, I've got a problem, the NHS will sort it out, to, I need to try to make sure I don't get a problem. And then when I do, yes, the NHS is there for me.
Absolutely.
There has to be a whole paradigm shift in the way we approach our health. It is first and foremost our responsibility. And everybody around is there to help us. And that's what I mean. So COVID is a great example of this. First of all, it's worth reiterating that this is an entirely new and obviously deadly virus. We know very little about it. And it's clear from how countries have been trying to manage it that everybody has been doing their best. But doing your best against an invisible enemy is well nigh impossible, but you are not going to be able to get it right all the time.
No.
And therefore there has to be, given the uncertainty, given the ignorance, an element of trial and error, an element of trying an approach based on whatever scientific knowledge there is at the time and hoping it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there has to be some forbearance from the public to recognize that actually this is something nobody has ever faced before, managed before. And the politicians, and I do think they are doing their best, but they're under constant pressure, constant scrutiny, and therefore they're having to make these promises like 100,000 tests a day.
Yeah.
Even today, the health secretary has said that. Well, there are 20,000 at the moment. And in 7 days, it's supposed to reach 100,000. So it's that sort of pressure, that sort of scrutiny, that sort of an unforgiving attitude from the public who make their politicians utter things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the problem. That's why I'm saying human beings are flawed. They do not like hearing the truth. They think if a politician says, listen, guys, we've never encountered this germ before. We are learning as we go along. There will be mistakes on the way, but that is not because we haven't tried our best. That is because this is something we've never met before. And a politician who says that will be deemed to be weak, to be ignorant.
Yeah. There's a blame and shame that is
That's right.
prevalent within the human race that we enjoy being in, or something. There's something it feels very uncomfortable. And I have to say, through everything that we've seen from the politicians is, nobody's going out there wanting death. They're just going out trying to do the best that they're able to do. And
Right.
we can all sit on the fence and say, well, I could do better. We can all do that as we sit on the sidelines. But it becomes not very helpful, really, for us to move forward. It's interesting, isn't it? We talk about this situation of humans being flawed. It's a podcast in itself, I believe, a conversation we could have, a big conversation about. But what is that core lesson about how the public use the NHS? And I know you talked about it in your last podcast, that you think can be taken forwards, and you touched on it, but just really embedding that message so that, those people who are listening to it kind of pass it on. What does that look like?
I think it sort of has 4 stages, 4 steps. And the first step, and they're all very important, but the first step is self-reliance and increased resilience. So during the COVID pandemic, we have seen, and with regards to children, but even adults, there has been a massive drop in the footfall into hospitals. Yes, there is, of course, a fear factor. There is, of course, hospitals telling patients not to come if they have cough and a fever. But that cannot be the entire explanation. There must be an enhanced ability. People have realized that actually they can help themselves to a greater degree than they had thought previously. And that's very important. The vast majority of illnesses are minor. The vast majority of illnesses can be managed by pain relief and antipyretics to bring fever down and hydration. So the first step of this, what I call health and safety ladder, would be self-reliance and greater resilience, which seems to have happened. Now, the next step, if you're concerned and the first step hasn't worked, would be, once again, for minor illnesses, consult a pharmacist. So if you go onto the NHS website with regards to pharmacy, it lists a very clear number of conditions that pharmacists are qualified to be consulted on. Also lists various other functions that the pharmacist can do. So this is official guidance. And my question is, how many people know this? This should be actually propagated far and wide. When you feel you need help, and it's a minor illness, as the majority are, then go to your pharmacist first. Exhaust that source of care and information. The pharmacists are very good and very sensible, and they will say, this is out with our expertise. The next step should be, and this is once again where the COVID pandemic has shown how things can work, NHS 111 virtual service or a GP virtual service. I think virtual consultations will skyrocket. So that's the third step of the health and safety ladder. Virtual consultations the landscape will transform. And if you have any sense and learn from this, that's one thing that must happen to reduce the footfall into hospitals. Because I can tell you, within 7 months, 6, 7, 8 months, we'll be back where we started, not only with COVID, a potential resurgent COVID, but also with the annual influenza epidemic, the flu epidemic. And the fourth rung of the health and safety ladder would then be to go to hospital or in person to the GP surgery. Now, accident emergency units should be used just for that. If you do an audit, certainly of pediatric accident emergency units, it's quite clear that out of 100 patients that go in there to seek advice and attention, 85 are discharged within a few hours.
Yeah.
So that suggests that a lot of them can actually use the first three options I'm suggesting before embarking on a trip to hospital.
Yeah, I mean, when you start to lay it out and you start to have a conversation about the fact that all these things have happened because of COVID, you start to think, okay, the money that is being spent on the NHS right now, and they talk about this kind of lack of funds, etc., etc. Actually, when you start to lay it out like that, it's not, there may be a lack of funds, but it's not just about the lack of funds. It's the fact that the funds are being used in the incorrect way, servicing people who aren't meant to be in accident and emergency and don't need to be in hospital, and so on and so on and so on, and who are, you know, calling a paramedic out when they don't need to, for example, which, you know, you kind of hear the stories of that. Do you think that this will be a lesson? You know, they're talking about a lack of funds within the NHS, and that we're not able to cope with COVID because of their lack of funds, and so on and so on. Do you think that that's a media spin on different things, on the cuts that have potentially been made? And I don't know whether even that's true, to be fair. But do you think that that is something?
No, I don't think COVID and the severity of COVID has anything to do with the lack of funds. You just need to look around the world. We keep hearing, or we kept hearing, that Italy has one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world. It looks what it's on its knees. Look at what's happened to it.
Yeah.
Inevitably, these things are multifactorial. I don't like using the word complex, because actually I don't think it's complex at all. I think, once again, human behavior influences a lot of this. The best care delivered to somebody and the best environment for somebody is at home. Therefore, people should try to stay out of hospital as much as possible. And if there wasn't so much pressure on hospital, then we wouldn't see the horror stories regularly that we see all the time during winter, the same old thing about accident emergency waiting times, trolley waits, ambulance waits, etc., etc. So I think there has to be a shift across the board. I really think that the public have a very significant role to play and take more responsibility for their own health, and ask the question, do I really need to go to hospital? Not just to pressurize a highly pressured health service, but also to expose themselves to germs that are proliferating in corridors.
Yeah.
In a crowded room, an accident and emergency, when everybody's coughing and spluttering, these germs are proliferating all the time.
Yeah.
So you go in with one problem, you potentially come out with another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Funding, yes, funding, the government has announced increased funding, but nothing, and no country has a bottomless pit.
No.
So we blame funding for all sorts of things. It's not as simple as that.
No.
There's a whole host of factors responsible for this, and this has now become the perfect storm. Because whilst we've emptied hospitals to treat COVID patients, there are numerous cancer patients and patients with all other sorts of problems who are not coming to hospital.
Yeah.
So those problems are beginning to mount up. Which is even more reason for those with relatively minor illnesses to be disciplined about using what is going to be a very, very pressurized service.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been mentioned, you know, in things that I've seen and heard, that COVID doesn't know the difference between the wealthy and the poor, and it does not discriminate, etc., etc. And you will have seen those headlines. However, you know, my thoughts are that in fact it does in many ways, because those people who are on the front line are those people who are the lowlier paid people, and you talk about kind of cleaners and shop workers, and they're the people who are really putting their lives on the line, and they're at the front line of it so that we can be fed, and and everything else. Do you believe this conversation of COVID-19 has no boundaries, has a place in future discussions or learnings?
Clearly, when you're at the coalface, then you are more exposed, and I think there are many lessons to be learned from that. For instance,
Can I
screens
just
in
pause a
buses.
moment? We're on a timely, completely by accident, the NHS clapping. So
Oh,
I will clap afterwards, but that's the noise in the background.
I can't hear. Yeah, it's all shut. So yes, I mean, I think practices will have to change because you brought out an absolutely brilliant point, and sadly, there have been many deaths amongst frontline healthcare workers, but other key workers as well, and they will all need to be protected. The way we live our lives is going to have to change dramatically and drastically. And the mantra about hand washing must continue.
Yeah.
The other thing that we need to highlight, and I will certainly do my best as a healthcare professional, is what we call fomites. So surfaces that we all touch regularly throughout the day, unconsciously, that harbor these germs. And then we touch our faces, and that's another very big source of infection. So going back to the frontline workers, for instance, the bus drivers should be provided with screens. Bus drivers should be provided with masks, and so on. People in supermarkets serving customers should be provided with facilities to wash their hands regularly, hand gel of 70% alcohol, and masks. There's going to have to be a complete sea change in the way they interact with the rest of the public. Now, COVID-19, in fact, does discriminate against a particular type of person, and the statistics are very stark. It is brutal to those with weight problems. There are statistics showing that a very significant percentage of people who have sadly passed away are obese. In the under 55s, in the over 60s, a very significant percentage. And in fact, I've written a letter to our local paper that was published saying this is now a wake-up call, because our health is in our hands and feet. Because unless we do something, and in the vast majority of people who are overweight, it's never too late. It's like smoking. It's never too late to stop smoking. And this goes back to the seminal point I was making earlier on. This has brought out in stark reality the need for us to take charge of our own health, because this virus is not forgiving.
No.
I remember the swine flu epidemic, which was about 15 years ago. It didn't differentiate. A lot of overweight, obese people actually did as well as those who weren't overweight. But this virus, which is going to be there with us for a long time, is absolutely brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. There is this conversation around kind of mental health, though, as well, I think, because, eating is one of those things like smoking or drinking or doing something to kind of numb and suppress the challenges that somebody might not be dealing with emotionally or through their mental health. And so there's a circle somewhere that I see that, it's not always as simple as somebody's just obese and they're overweight. There's another support system needed to be enhanced upon for that to improve. Do you think that that's true?
Totally. Just like COVID and its effect on the health service, it's multifactorial.
Yeah.
There's no simple answer to this. And in fact, in that context, I think the army of volunteers that have come forward, that sort of activity for a person who's obese for various different reasons can be a great channel to expend the energy to get out, to feel an increased amount of self-esteem by doing something and helping other people who need the help. So I think volunteering, being associated with a charity organization, is a great way of healing those problems that have led to the end result of being overweight and obese and having high blood pressure, etc., etc. So there are many ways of engaging these people that can actually be very therapeutic. And I don't think that's espoused enough. It's not championed enough. It's all too easy to go to a doctor's surgery and be given tablets, but actually that's not the answer.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer that kindness is like the healer of all great things. You know, when we go and volunteer, when we start to just be more aware of our surroundings and who's in our company. And, you know, that's what I've seen with COVID-19, communities that barely knew each other and didn't really have direct contact in any way, are suddenly having a greater awareness of their neighbours, of people around them, they're checking on them. Do you believe that you've seen that as well? I mean, the NHS is doing some extraordinary things, but, you know, as a whole, do you think that people are coming together more?
Oh yeah, most definitely. It's been a revelation. And having been critical of human beings and our flaws, I think this has really, really brought the best out of us. Just in my neighborhood, we've sadly lost 3 people in the neighborhood where the community has come together. There have been offers of not just condolence, but support, company. My son signed up to drop food off and medicines off to people who are isolating at home. So it has been an explosion, an incredible way, an explosion of kindness. The key in the test is what will happen post-COVID.
Yeah.
The test is to retain that because we are all in this together. And hopefully that will be one of the lessons. People will feel so enthused by what they have done by participating in this culture of kindness and the explosion of kindness that actually will carry on.
Yeah.
And it'll become mainstream, and people who had previously been reluctant to would have benefited so much from this that this will be part of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you believe that we can keep up this momentum? Is it possible for us to do that?
Not at the current rate, sadly. I think it's if so. The focus going forward of the media, of social media, of the papers should be on health and the environment. And part of health is not just your own health, but other people's health.
Yeah.
And helping other people's health by volunteering helps your health. So I think if this is propagated in the right way, communicated in the right way, at regular intervals, cajoling people along, the nudge effect, then yes, I think we can retain it. Perhaps not to the same intensity.
No.
But
it is. It's crazy intense. I mean, I write about this and found this within my research that these kind of waves throughout society of this unbelievable kindness, and those habits have been because when we're really with our backs against the wall, the worst times that have happened ever, and within society, and what happens is we just become kinder. You know, sometimes, I mean, we saw some people fearful and they kind of grabbed things from supermarkets, and that was all through fear. That's all it was. But in the most part, people care. You know, people want to make sure, because I always believe that we understand as human beings that we can't survive this alone. You know, we need to come together and be together to really survive on Earth. So yeah, it's a fascinating viewpoint, and it's a fascinating time, I think, for society, and whether how much we take forwards of what's going on right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the government should unashamedly espouse this. The last time David Cameron suggested big society was shot down in flames, well, actually, that's wrong.
Yeah.
This has been a revelation, and we must not lose the momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, thank you so much for speaking to me once again. I know you've written this brilliant blog that I've put onto a Culture of Kindness blog, so people can go and take a look, and it's the day in the life and what you experienced when you went in. Just to give a summary of that, what was that experience while we're on that theme of kindness and camaraderie?
Well, I think it's worth remembering that I'm a pediatrician, but I felt I had to contribute to this huge COVID effort. So I was a bit apprehensive. I have looked after adults quite a long time ago. So I entered the unit with a bit of trepidation in the full PPE that has become so topical. And it was incredible because what I saw was the atmosphere was very calm, serious but calm, and everybody was going about their jobs in a very controlled, methodical manner. And that's the best way. That's how I like to run my unit when I'm looking after sick children. And because a lot of the staff on the unit that day were actually children's nurses who were stepping up, that atmosphere had not changed. And everybody was doing their bits. A lot of them were also rather apprehensive, but just got on with the job. And I think my colleagues fully deserve the adulation that they get. Because what I saw, the selflessness I saw, the can-do attitudes, the approach to families, the empathy, that was just remarkable.
Yeah.
It was a very humbling experience, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm humbled every time I read a new story and I think about all of the people, and not just the NHS, the care workers, the drivers, the cleaners, the people that have no choice, and they're keeping us running as a country and throughout the world. So yeah, no, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for your time again. I know people are going to love getting a bit of an insight into the NHS and seeing a very different viewpoint that you offer. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Whether you're a CEO or department manager, you can build a more productive, profitable and engaged workforce through adopting the theory laid out in my latest book, available on Amazon, aptly also named A Culture of Kindness. It will guide you on how to be the type of leader that every employee remembers for all the right reasons. You can also subscribe to the monthly newsletter at www.nahalasummers.com to hear more about the latest talks, courses, and upcoming podcast episodes. Thank you.